Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This week is a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Batman Caped Crusader Season 1, Episode 5. Great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I love the show, always answering the questions that I have. My biggest one so far had been like, okay, so how does Harley become, well, Harley Quinn? And this episode answers that. I think it's so fascinating because I kept being like, I don't think there's going to be a Joker in this. And I knew they were tweaking things. So the comparison I keep bringing up is the Telltale Batman game. I mentioned it like literally last episode. I kept referencing it. And I specifically on the Harley front, I kept referencing it because that's one of the few continuities where they flip the Joker and Harley dynamic. Whereas typically Joker's a more dominant personality, Harley the more submissive. They flip it so that like the Harley position is what Joker's in. He's like, oh, so in love with her. He wants to impress her. He'll do anything for her. And she's the more dominant personality. In fact, she kind of makes him into the Joker. Whereas at that point, he was just John Doe. So that's what I figured they were going to flip the script in this one. Because that's one of the few situations where I've seen a storyline flip the Harley and Joker situation. And they kind of done it in this. I thought it was so fascinating when we find out, like, oh yeah, basically she's hypnotizing and mentally breaking people, like rich douchebags, into giving up their money and stuff. I was like, oh, so she's like anti-hero-ish. She's kind of a vigilante herself. I was like, that's so interesting. I was like, so that's the approach they're taking with this. From what we can see, she's been active for a while because one of her victims was like from 3 years ago. So the whole Harley thing isn't something she did recently. Just no one's put it together like some of the wild behavior of some of the people. Because no one put together, oh, all these people have one thing in common. They're Harley's patients. So also, I like that Jamie Chung got an opportunity to do what any person who voices Batman does, but obviously in the context of the show, what Hamish Linklater gets to do, and that's the whole distinguishment between your Batman voice and your Bruce Wayne voice. She got to do a Dr. Quinzel voice and a Harley voice, because I think it's so interesting because sometimes you'll get it like a Kaylee Cuoco gets to do both because it's very rarely in the show, but she's gotten to play Harley and Quinzel, but most of the time she's playing Harley. So I don't remember we ever really got much of Margot as Harley and Quinzel. I think maybe in the first Suicide Squad movie I watched it once. But just the fact is, it's not like the fact is that Jamie Chung has an opportunity to flip back and forth. I think it's kind of a dope, like very much like I said, a Batman-esque thing. So I think it's so dope that she got that opportunity in this version because I feel like a lot of people don't always get that chance when it comes to that character. Because usually when you're playing Harley unless you get the opportunity. I doubt she's going to do a different voice, but like Lady Gaga, I doubt there's going to be much difference between her Harley and Quinzel and her Harley Quinn because those lines are so blurred in that particular version of that story, what they're doing with that character. So I think she won't have that opportunity, but I think it's, like I said, usually when she's Harley Quinn all the way through unless you get some flashback stuff. So I just think that's kind of like a neat thing about this. I think that's such an interesting direction to take Harley without, giving a new spin to the Harley like lore and just doing your own thing with it, like twisting it without Joker making her who she is. She just naturally is disgusted by people in this city, and she's like the opposite end. Whereas like Bruce is trying to attack this from like the corruption criminal angle, she's attacking this from like the rich and powerful angle of the rich and powerful like. I don't know if they're necessarily criminals, but they're rich douchebags. And she's like, right, why not put your money to some good? Take all the money you have and put it in a charity. She's doing good with it. She's just not going about it the best way. So it makes you wonder, like, she was able to read Bruce pretty easily. So she knows, like, he's not, like, he might be a rich douche, but he's not like every other rich douche because she never did anything to Bruce. She never tried to. To be fair, she probably didn't have an opportunity to because Bruce wasn't her main patient. He was court appointed. She was trying to get him to become a main patient. So given enough time, maybe she would have made a move on Bruce. Who knows? So that begs the question. But I assume like she saw enough through Bruce to know like, right, everything you do is like a facade, which maybe that's also why she like gleamed onto that so hard because she herself was kind of living a facade. I'm curious like which side of herself does she view as, because Bruce struggles with that because Batman is who he is. Bruce Wayne's the mask. for Harley, which one is her? Is Harley Quinn the real her, or is Harlan Quinzel, or does she recognize like, no, they're both a side of me, you know? And I'm so curious to know her mindset on that. I'm sure, like, more often than not, Harley's like, no, like, Harlan Quinzel was who I was. That was a false me. Harley Quinn is who I really am. I feel like that's typically Harley's perspective on it, but, you know, maybe I'm mistaken in that. But like I said, I just think it's such a neat thing. What also took me by surprise was the Montoya of it all, when she was like, oh yeah, let's go eat, it's a date. I was like, did she mean that literally? And then later on when she's talking to Barbara, which I didn't comment on it, I do love that her nickname for Barbara isn't like Babs or Barb. It's like, nah, it's Barbie. I was like, that's actually really cute and adorable. It feels very, that's what I was like, kind of, it feels the same footing as like a like calling Joker pudding, you know? Which I don't know if that was supposed to be a wink and nod to that when, like, that she was like, oh, like, you take care of this guy, make him give up all his fortunes and stuff like that, I'll give you pudding. He's like, pudding. Like, I don't know if that was supposed to be like a slight wink and nod to that or not. But anyway, back to the Montoya of it all. When she was talking to Babs about, like, oh, like, what is she into? And I was like, oh, because she's like, I want to really impress her. I was like, oh, wow, you meant date. Which is really interesting because I was like, made me kind of go like, so is Montoya gay or bi in the comics? Because this is the second adaptation I've come across that had her dating a woman, which I thought was really interesting. The previous one being Batwoman. She's in the 3rd season of Batwoman as a recurring character. She was, interestingly enough, in a relationship with Pamela Isley, aka Poison Ivy. Granted, her and Pamela were together before she became Poison Ivy, well before she became Poison Ivy. But it's kind of an interesting thing on double fronts of, okay, she's dating Harleen Quinzel before she's Harley Quinn, even though she's always been Harley Quinn, just no one knew about it. But it's extra interesting because obviously, if you know, Harley and Ivy are a couple, you know, both in the animated show, but also in the comics. I mean, it just depends on the run. But I was like, oh, that's interesting that Montoya, like, adaptation versions of Montoya have dated, like, both sides of that couple, interesting enough. I mean, granted, they only went on one date, but it could have been so much more. Because it did seem like she was interested in Montoya, but I thought that was just kind of like a, hey, new friend. But it's like, nope, you were aiming for more, which is interesting. So it adds a different layer to what I already said was going to be a complicated thing with Barbara and Harley being besties. Like, I was like, oh, that shift is going to be interesting in this because you had that personal connection. But now it's like, oh, Montoya was kind of falling for her. So it's like, yeah, it was just one date. But I mean, we don't know, like, Montoya, like, whether she's like really been on a lot of dates. Has she ever, like, you know, I mean, once again, whether she's gay or bi, like, has she ever admitted she's really been interested in women? So I think that, just saying, that's so fascinating. Like I said, it just adds this different layer to, like, oh, there's something bubbling there. Like, it's the beginning of something before it could even become something that was already cut short, you know? But going back to the Barbara of it all, it is this complicated conundrum for her where it is this situation of, she even had to talk to her dad about it. It's like, all the evidence is pointing towards Harley, but she doesn't want to, like, pull the trigger on it because it's like, what do you do when the evidence points you in the direction you don't want to look? And her dad was like, you just have to basically accept it, basically take all the information in and kind of make your decision then. And maybe I'm butchering that, but because he's kind of neck deep in work because he's got to deal with all these other cases because every other cop is having to follow Bullock and Flass down this Batman route, which that blew up in their faces when he, in the smoke, took down every cop and just kind of bailed. And I love that Flass and Bullock are the only ones left standing when it's all said and done. So not like you guys did a bang up job. And to be fair, it works out for Gordon because he's not the face of this operation anymore. They are. So any blunders they have blow back on them. But I'm sure he will suffer the ramifications too. So he's still trying to do good work by taking out any other criminals. Because he's like, yeah, the mayor's only focused on Batman because he's the one getting the most spotlight. But still. I brought it up earlier that Harley had, like, hypnotized people. I mean, once again, she's a psychiatrist. I'm sure she could, but it's also, like, just in general, being able to mentally break people, like, getting inside of their head. I mean, to be fair, it's like she was a psychiatrist that was mentally broken by the Joker. So it's like, you know, what I'm saying, it's like that. the irony behind that, I think the irony's always probably existed with that character in that capacity, but it is interesting, like when you get to see like her little rambunk, like her little squad of people, which we never find out what happens to them later on in the episode. When she escapes on her own with her like right hand dude Hastings, which it seems like Hastings was one of her patients too. Like, so it seems like basically everyone she works with, all her goons are former patients who are billionaires, except for the one dude that she killed. It makes you wonder, well, he might have just been mentally disturbed and tried to kill himself, like without, that wasn't Harley's order, because you had that dude that Barbara was trying to represent. And I love that line. It's such an interesting line when he, like, she's like, oh, Dr. Harleen Quinzel will be the one I'll get to give you a psych eval. And he says, Harley Quinn? And she's like, do you know her? And he's like, I don't know, but it just, her name sounds so good, like it tastes so good in my mouth or something like that. I was like, that's interesting phrasing. But I was like, oh, just like the seductiveness of like Harley Quinn tastes so good in my mouth, you know? And home dude tried to jump off the hospital if like Barbara hadn't stopped him. So I doubt I made it earlier seem like Harley probably killed that dude, but it's like, no, he probably just mentally was unstable after what she did. But that's the thing of like, Harley doesn't care about the shells that she's leaving behind, because who cares? So that's why I'm wondering about those guys. Did she set them free, or did she have them go like, no, you're going to meet me like wherever I go, and you're going to be my henchman going forward, which is interesting to know that those are going to be her henchmen. Because typically when I think of her henchmen, I think of like, well, her henchmen are usually Joker henchmen. So her own henchmen being like patients that she's warped their minds into being what she wanted them to be. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing. Obviously, Barbara's got that instinct like her dad because of what he said this episode to her about like kind of facing the evidence, but also just like her unwillingness to back down. To be fair, she has a personal, not vendetta, but aspect to this because it is her best friend that's involved in all of this. So she tried to sneak back in, and Batman's like, yo, what are you doing here? He's like, don't worry about Quinzel, I'll handle it. And just like grapple hooks away, and she's like, that's not fair. I'm curious how she probably did just climb her way in. I'm curious how she found her way into the house, but either way, like there was this interesting dynamic between Harley and Batman where she's just kind of like, oh yeah, like understanding, like she's like, oh, I knew you'd like basically come to me because like you were kind of, she kind of played the kindred spirit angle to it, because she's like, how many criminals you beat up will be enough? 20? 10? 20? Like they're like kept going, and eventually locked him in one of the cages and says like, right, I don't want you to die. The fact of the matter is, I'll give you just give me a head start so you're not on my hiney. The fact of the matter is, I'll give you 5 minutes for you to find a way out of here. And she's like, maybe we'll meet again someday. We can really dive into that childhood trauma, which I'm like, does she know it's Bruce? Because she's like, I learned enough about you because I did a profile on you for the cops last episode, so I knew eventually you'd come knocking, but and kind of piece it together and stuff. But the fact that she threw out the childhood trauma, I'm sure like that's a go-to of like, well, there's got to be some childhood trauma for you to dress like a bat and like beat up criminals. There's got to be an element of that. But referencing that, you can't help but think like maybe she knows he's Bruce. Probably doesn't. But, because I'm sure for some psychologists, it's like, I'm sure a psychologist would be like, no, it's not that simple where you just assume like childhood trauma tends to be at the root of stuff. And that's making a massive generalization on my part. Like I said, I'm kind of saying that jokingly. So that's why I'm like, she just responds and sees that what you're doing is either childhood trauma, but she also knows Bruce's childhood trauma. So I don't know if she's necessarily equated the two together. Because she knows there's more to Bruce, and she said as much, and he was quick to dodge it, and she could tell there was something more. But once again, it's because she herself was hiding more. So I'm so curious to see what that kind of means going forward. She was going to leave Bruce, like I said, leave him there, but Barbara, she found out Barbara went back to the house, and she had to get Barbara out. But the place started crumbling. And Harley was telling Barbara to let her go when they fell, but it's like, no, I'm not going to. Batman catches Barbara, but not Harley. But you're like, they're not killing Harley. I mean, to be fair, they kill Firebug, but it's like, hey, she's falling into the water, so she can easily just get away. This is Firebug versus Harley Quinn, so we know who's more important, and sadly, when it comes to the villain category, so it's like, yeah, you're anyone versus Harley Quinn popularity wise, you're gonna lose. Why, so either way, I thought it was interesting. Like, Bruce was kind of a dick in this moment. He's like, you let your friendship with Harley like blind you or whatever. It's like, when I told you to leave, and she's just like, shut up, and he does admit, he's like, I am sorry, because he does try to be so detached, especially as Batman. But in that moment, he's just like, I know it sucks. You were betrayed by the person you care about, and it's like, I doubt Bruce thinks she's dead. Who knows? Maybe he does. But it's still the thing of what you went through, your betrayal. It's like, what, being betrayed the way you were. It's like, I'm sorry. And I was wondering, like, when Montoya was waiting for her for their other date, I was like, is she going to find out this way? Like, is someone, Barbara, going to show up and tell her, or is she just going to keep waiting? But Harley called her on the payphone and was like, yeah, I'm going to leave town. So it's like, Montoya ends this episode not knowing what went down. The police eventually are going to find out, because they roll up on the scene, so Barbara's going to tell them. Which I'm curious to see what that means in the grand scheme of things for Barbara and Gordon, Jim. Because, well, it's like, oh, this criminal was under your... Well, because it does a lot, because I'm sure Harley being revealed to be the villain she was, or, will taint a lot of Barbara's career, because Barbara would bring her in a lot as, like, her expert. So that's going to taint probably a lot of her career. Plus, it's going to blow back on her and Jim, because it's like, hey, you brought her in for the Batman thing last episode, but also, hey, Jim, this criminal was friends with your daughter. Not only did your daughter not know, but now you didn't know, so that's going to make them look bad. It's also going to reflect badly on Montoya if anyone finds out that they went on a date. Like, there could be blowback for this. I'm curious to see if this show covers that or not. Like, definitely on the Barbara and Jim front, I feel like out of anyone, they would suffer the biggest blowback. Like I said, the Montoya thing is such a this episode thing that might not be found out. I could definitely see the other cops giving her a hard time. I mean, even though they've kind of sucked ass at catching the Batman, because they were giving her a hard time about the Clayface thing. So I could see them giving her a hard time about this if the show decided to go down that route. But, some very fascinating circumstances. Like I said, I do feel bad for Renee. Like, it's just the beginning of something, and we don't know what Montoya's relationship status was. This might have been like a first good thing. And every cop needs something outside of work, and obviously we see with Jim, he's dedicated to his work, not taking a break. Montoya is kind of living life. She's finding that work-life balance, and hey, I was kind of with someone I found interesting, and oh, that person's gone, and wait, oh, that person was like brainwashing people to do stuff. And it's like, I mean, was she doing the most evil of evil things? No, but she was still doing some criminal shit. So, and especially Montoya is very much like hey, if Batman's a criminal, so is Harley, obviously. So it's a very, very interesting developments. I'm really excited to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.